I'm Richard Slee. Join us before the polls close at 8 p.m. on Thursday the 23rd of September for Election Night Live from Studio One and Energy FM. Look forward to seeing you.
There isn't just one action that can stop COVID in its tracks, but taking personal measures and building healthy habits will help to protect us all. COVID-19 spreads in confined spaces, crowded places and close contact settings. Wash your hands regularly and practice good hand hygiene. Carry a face covering at all times and wear it in any crowded or busy places. Increase your distance when you can and seek out fresh air either by meeting outdoors or increasing ventilation indoors. These little personal steps will really help add up and protect not only you, but those around you. Lateral flow device kits are available free of charge to everyone in the Isle of Man. You can order them online at gov.im/COVID-19 or collect them from any participating pharmacy. It is recommended that everyone test every 3 to 4 days. In the last few weeks, almost 70% of positive PCR tests were identified thanks to an initial LFD test, making them a really important tool to uncover hidden cases of the virus. Vaccinations are effective in preventing severe illness, hospitalisation and even death. The vaccination programme is available to all island residents aged 16 and over and provides our greatest collective defence and ability to manage COVID-19 long term. It takes just 1 minute to register for the COVID-19 vaccination and it could save you from severe infection. Be safe, be smart, be kind for our island.
Hello and welcome to Election 2021 Question Time. In this edition, we feature the candidates looking to represent the constituency of Rushen. Joining me on the panel are, in alphabetical order, Michelle Hayward, Mark Kemp, Andrew Langan-Newton and Duwin Watterson. Following the general election on September the 23rd, two of them will be elected to the House of Keys. Before we start with questions, we're giving each candidate up to 2 minutes to introduce themselves. And first up, we have Michelle Hayward. Michelle.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Michelle Hayward. I've been a commissioner down in Portsmouth for the last 5 years, and I was chair for the last 3 years down there. I think local government has proved to be an excellent training ground for a move into national government. And there are certainly some things at local level that I know are problems that need addressing at national level. In my day job, I run a business, small business, and that involves an awful lot of finance and planning and all of those things that go into running small businesses. And lots of people who run small businesses will understand the pressures that we've been under in the last couple of years and how we've had to navigate our way through that. Prior to that, I was a lecturer in environmental science at University College of Man, and I continue to address those issues because I actively do research for clients in the marine sphere and environmental settings. As a scientist, for my background, I practice evidence-based decision-making. That means I want to gather the facts together, and then to put my business head on top of that, I want to understand the costs, the benefits, the threats to any project that I'm undertaking, and I intend to bring those steps forward into my decision-making as an MHK. I believe that government should be putting together a sustainable programme for government, and under the UN's sustainability goals, it's not just about the land and the marine spheres being protected. It's also about poverty, it's about housing, it's about education, it's about workers' rights, and it's about access to decent healthcare. The recovery from COVID has never been so important than it is now. People have become generally complacent about the level of infection that's running around, but the economic impacts are still being felt, and the mental health impacts are still affecting our schools and our workplaces. Most of all, I want to represent local people. I think most people think the Isle of Man's a wonderful place to live in. There are some things that aren't right, and I want to help put those better. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle.
Thanks.
Mark Kemp.
Thank you, Richard. So my name's Mark Kemp. I last stood in 2016, came within a swing vote of 55 of getting elected. I stood on the platform of transparency and accountability, and what I'm looking to achieve this time is to engage with all successful candidates if I'm elected, and we'll work together on a Safeguarding the Future bill, which is where we take the programme for government from the Council of Ministers, and it's participative across Tynwald, and what we'll have is public mandates and our engagement on the doorstep, which is going to provide a framework for the future. Now, the things I'm talking about on the doorstep are 4 pillars, which is education reform, budget reform, sustainable island, diversifying the economy. We need to tackle civil service reform. And within that, we need to keep a watchful eye on the public's mental health, and we need to be listening to our youth. Now, the other things we need to be looking at on a local level, and this is something that's come up frequently during my time on the doorsteps, is there's a lot of loneliness in Rushen, and I'm sure that's replicated across the island. This is something we need to tackle. This is something that's come up during my time on the doorsteps, and it plays into the greater aspect of mental health, where we need to tackle that as well. Other issues locally are speeding in the area. We need to give our kids something to do. So we saw recently in the news about the kids not being allowed to jump off the harbours. Instead of just saying no to them, how about we say, here's something else to do? So, for example, inflatable obstacle courses on the beach, they can jump off those. I'm looking to get your vote, and I hope that tonight you will be impressed enough to vote Kemp.
Thank you, Mark. Andrew Langan-Newton.
My name is Andrew Langan-Newton. Let me take you into the future. not 50 years into the future, not even 20. A future where we build our society upon the assets that we have around us in abundance. The wind, the sun, the waves, the tide. A society of clean, cheap, renewable energy for everyone. Where we build our communities around the social connections that we are dependent upon. Where we have free public transport all around the Isle of Man. A society where we measure the success of our society not on economic factors disconnected from reality, but on well-being. A society where we play an active role in the participation in the governance of our society. Not just a vote every 5 years, but actively engaging and having the opportunity to do so in the decision-making that shapes our society. A society and a future where we reuse and recycle more of the products in our society, in the Isle of Man, not just burning them or burying them. And a society where we give true protection to the environment that we depend upon for our very existence. These things won't just come about. We need to make decisions today for that future. We can't wait 5 more years to bring about this transformation. Join me on September the 23rd in this vision for the future.
Thank you, Andrew. Durin Watterson.
Good evening. I'm Durin Watterson, a proud Manxman born and raised in the constituency of Rushen, where I live with my wife and 2 children. I have a first-class degree in management and I'm a qualified chartered accountant and chartered manager. I've been a member of the House of Keys for the last 15 years, a minister for 5 and speaker for the last 5 years. I bring an unparalleled track record of being active and unafraid to speak up for my constituents, holding government to account. As chairman of the Public Accounts Committee, I've consistently tackled waste and pursued an ongoing quest for better value for money and better outcomes in public service. This has led to reforms in many areas, particularly the health service, which I hope will bear fruit as we move forward. During the last 5 years, I've also chaired the Select Committee on Poverty, whose work will lead to the minimum wage rising to the living wage over the next 5 years, lifting some 16% of Manx workers out of poverty to a level where they can actually afford to live on this island. There is so much more to do, though, across physical and mental health, education, and especially housing. I'm also optimistic that the new House will have a renewed vigour in tackling climate change, a cause I've been supporting for the last 15 years. At a local level, I'm passionate about the people and places of Rushen, serving on the boards of Rushen Heritage Trust, Southern Befrienders, the Royal British Legion, the Southern Authorities Healthcare Committee, bringing my parliamentary experience, management and financial experience to bear, making a real difference and a direct connection with the people of Rushen. So far, I've personally knocked on 2,592 doors and hope to get to everyone, every household ahead of the election, and I hope to carry on serving you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for coming tonight. All of you have touched on this, so I want to start off in relation to climate change. The Isle of Man government has an ambition to achieve net zero emissions by 2050. So there's 2 parts to this. Do you feel that this target is actually too unambitious? And what would you do to prevent the costs of implementing green initiatives from burdening the poorest and most vulnerable members of our society? Andrew Langan-Newton.
Well, I mean, to start with the target, it's how do we get to that target? What are we trying to do in our societal response to climate change? What is the objective? That needs to be defined. And I would say the objective is to avoid catastrophic climate change, which is going to totally disrupt the way we and the rest of the world live our lives at the moment. So if that's the objective, how do we stop that happening? Well, we work out why it's being caused. And we know it's being caused. It's being caused by greenhouse gases being pumped down to the atmosphere historically and still today. And if that's the reason and that's the cause, then we measure how much time we have left, how much carbon we have left before the outcome, which we don't want, we want to avoid, catastrophic climate change comes to effect. And we know that. We get published every 5-6 years in the IPCC reports. We've had the IPCC 6th Assessment Report very recently restating the figures for our carbon budgets, reducing them because since the last report, I think in 2014, we haven't really done anything to stem those emissions. And when we reflect that in terms of the Isle of Man emissions, which are very high per head of capita, it brings out a figure of about 2035 to reduce our carbon emissions to zero. So that's the reality. It's like we could all say 2050, but where's this number 2050 come from? It hasn't come from the science, because the science is based upon the carbon budgets. And so that's what we need to do, 2050, and that is based upon reducing our carbon emissions in the region of about 17% per year. If we just go forward on our current emissions, we're going to run out of budget by about 2026. So I think we have to be led by science and best evidence and data on anything in healthcare, on education, and critically on our future of our society. So this 2050 is a red herring. I mean, we should be focusing on what the scientists are saying, not what the politicians are saying. The politicians should be led by the best data, by the best science. And it's going to be a tough challenge. And I don't think anyone is saying that. They're saying it's going to be a tough challenge about 2050. But it's going to be tougher if we realise when we get to 2035 that we've had the wrong target.
Nobody's doubting the science, but in relation to the second part of the question, government's intending to throw a lot of money at this tackling climate change. Inevitably, perhaps, the burden of those costs will fall on the poorest and most vulnerable in our society. How would you propose that that doesn't happen?
Well, I think the consequences of inaction also are going to be unduly burdensome upon the poor in our society. They are going to be impacted more than people have the efforts to put up defences, to move to other countries around the world. So the poor are going to be impacted both sides, and we should really take that into appreciation. I'm just highlighting that now. So yes, absolutely. And what we need to appreciate is any decision based upon costs needs to appreciate costs of inaction, but also needs to appreciate the opportunities, the advantages, the values in decisions made today to benefit the society. And that's investing in technologies that are dramatically transforming our future. I'm talking about renewable energy, but other areas of transport as well. We see renewable energy has fallen in the region of, so wind turbines, about 45% since 2010. Solar PV, we're talking about 75% fall in prices since 2010. Batteries, up near 90%. These are the technologies that we know are going to transform our society. We know what to do. We know what the products are. We just don't need to start those investments. Now, absolutely, this concept of a just transition. Now, the Isle of Man government seems to have an interpretation of a just transition that, oh, it's going to be the cheapest transition. But that doesn't ring to me. The equity has to be at the core of this. Justice. And that is appreciating who's got the strengths in society, who's got the value, and who has least, and then affording them the opportunity to have these technologies and transform their society. And we know that these technologies are falling in price. I mean, the figures we pick out the future are not the figures that are going to be in the future. They're going to be dramatically cheaper than that, because we base ourselves upon what we have now, but actually it's not always the experts who appreciate the disruption that comes with these technologies, like mobile phones, for example. And we're seeing this in transport industry as well, with things like autonomous vehicles. These technologies are coming, they're going to improve our society, but we still can't just accept them and assume they're going to come. We need to take advantage of them now and invest in our society, and absolutely invest.
Okay, I want to move on. Mark Kemp, your view, thanks.
Yeah, there's a lot of what Andrew says that you have to agree with, of course, and I would say that the 2050 target is unambitious. But we've got to bear in mind that we have an energy infrastructure that we need to change, and someone's got to pay for that. So if you consider the Arup report, there were 3 scenarios originally. Option 3 is the one I'm looking at. The biomass side of it, I will say, Andrew, I'm looking at other alternatives. So compressed air energy storage, for example, park that for now. But what we have to be mindful of is we have to solve the energy trilemma, so the sustainability, the cost, and the security of supply. And when it comes to the cost, we have to consider who's going to pay for all this brand new infrastructure. Now, if Scotland's 97% intermittent renewable, and you have the UK who are moving further and further towards being green energy, and Ireland are heading that way as well, we already have an interconnector to the UK, and we export to the tune of 3.9 million. That pays down debt. Unfortunately, though, it increases our carbon footprint. What we probably need to do, considering this Arup report, is add another interconnector repurpose the existing one. We have solar on public buildings, new builds. We have some wind power, but we have to be mindful of the renewal of some of these intermittent renewables, you know, the cost again to the public. So, for example, if we were to put wind turbines up the point of air, what we've got there is expensive infrastructure that requires expensive connection into the grid, you know, digging up people's back gardens and fields and so on. So we have to be mindful of things like that as well. Now, if we can import green energy, we're moving towards a more ambitious target, perhaps of 2035. What we don't want to do is we don't want to overburden anyone in society, and particularly those who are already struggling with food and fuel poverty.
Thank you. Michelle Hayward.
I think it's quite clear that the carbon emissions for the island primarily come from energy generation. The power stations are ageing, and that is the first decision that a new Tynwald is going to have to take, is to deal with what you're going to do to replace the power stations. And whether we replace them with interconnectors, whether we replace them with wind turbines, or whether you go down the insane route of building another gas turbine, it has to happen, and that cost is going to have to be borne by the public purse. There's no option on that. The next big thing after that comes up is transport. And we can't move to having electric vehicles. We don't generate enough electricity on the island to have electric vehicles. There just isn't the capacity there. And the prediction for the use of electricity is going to go up twofold in the next 20 years. What really saddens me about politics is that climate change is nothing new. I knew about it when I was way back in university. It's been known about for ages. And the difficulty for any politician is that you're making decisions that are going to be unpopular. And they're going to be unpopular in the short term, but in the long term, they are so necessary. And that has been avoided by politicians. And it's not just the Isle of Man, that's worldwide. Governments have avoided it until we are at crisis point. We are now at the point where there may not be a recovery in terms of global temperatures. We are certainly going to lose ice sheets that will never, ever come back again. And that is going to have an impact on us going forward. And so it's almost like we have to be staring down the barrel of a gun before we'll actually take some action. I think there are steps that you can do to reduce the burden on the poor. One of the particularly interesting developments of the last 10 years or so is the ability to build really low energy houses, so that the energy bill there is not £300 a month for a gas boiler that's in some local authority house, but actually their energy bills are £20 a month. And actually that's helping the very poorest in our society. If we can develop those homes and target them at, it should be local authorities getting support to rebuild those, because the people who are means tested to go into local authority homes by definition are some of the poorest in our society and deserve the most help. And so if you could give a family effectively a rebate on their energy bill, you are almost certainly improving their ability to put decent food on the table and to afford other things in life, because you're not driving them to paying huge gas bills, and the price of gas is set to go up astronomically next winter. It's set to go up by 75%. That will hit every single home that has gas heating on the island. So there is hope that there are ways that we can actually make that a much more just transition as we move away from fossil fuels, which we absolutely must do. I'm disappointed that some of the early green energy grants that have come out from the government are actually targeted at homeowners. They're targeted at people who are already able to afford some of those, and they're not targeted at the most vulnerable in society, where that fuel poverty is a real issue.
Okay, thank you. June Watterson.
Thank you. Well, I committed to not replacing a gas power station for a gas power station back in 2006, and I'd agree with, I think, most of the panel that the current climate change targets are unambitious, and of course I've had the luxury of voting for a 2035 target rather than a 2050 target, but as others have said, that target is still artificial, and we are standing on a burning platform. We are on a twin track. We do need a twin track approach of electrifying our energy needs in terms of transport, in terms of heating, and decarbonising the supply. And I don't think that the two have to happen one first and then the other. We need to work on both at the same time. In terms of the costs, these are absolutely unavoidable costs. The real issue is how you cash flow them, and then that's going to determine how it's paid for and who pays for it. In terms of supporting those on the lowest incomes, I think, again, the work of the Poverty Committee has been really enlightening to me in terms of making sure that we really sort of scrape the surface there and understand it. And one of the things that has come out of that is a cost of living review, so we actually understand what it does cost to live on the Isle of Man, and climate change is going to have to be a part of that, because it will be reflected in things such as Michelle said about the gas prices and so on. We have 6,000 local authority and government houses on the island, and when I was member for housing back in 2006, 2009, I was the first politician to introduce solar heating schemes on local authority homes. Now, what I'm really disappointed at is, having done that and having been the first to introduce biomass, we seem to have rolled back on those sorts of initiatives as time's gone on, and we've not put solar panels, we've not put wind turbines into local authority estates, because that is where the poorest of our society live. And that's got to translate through to pensions, benefits and wages in terms of that cost of living assessment. Because I want to see, in terms of our national grid, in terms of that growth of electricity demand from the 80 megawatts we use now to the 140 that we're going to need, national wind, national photovoltaic, but also interest-free or low-interest grants for every household on the Isle of Man to be able to put wind and solar into their properties, because every house, every office that has a sort of south-facing or southwest-facing roof on this island has the potential to be a mini power station for us, and that's exactly what we're going to need going forward.
Thank you. Do any of you worry if we have the interconnector that we don't become sort of self-sustainable, if you like, in generating our own electricity? For the likes of the gaming industry, for example, having that power generation on island is critical for resilience. Mark?
Well, this is the thing. So I think when was the last blackout, Ewan?
Not since this power station was built. No,
exactly. So you're right. If we have something on island, it's security of supply. But of course, we've got to solve the energy trilemma. Look, we have one interconnector right now which we can repurpose and extend the useful life of. Obviously, we need to build another one. I think, was it Guernsey or Jersey, had a load of internet cables severed by a trawler. So we've got to be mindful that we can lose an interconnector very quickly. So we need security of supply. But if we are gradually introducing more and more intermittent renewables, and as Andrew rightly says, the cost of these have come down with a bang, other ones will continue to come down, such as tidal, we can move towards more hydrogen production through electrolysis. So down the road, we can start producing more on-island energy.
Thank you. Michelle?
I think the real value in having the interconnector is out of action for 10 or 12 days a year for maintenance. That's just routine at the moment. And having a second interconnector gives you the ability to cover your base load and not have to worry about that power outage. And that's where the power station steps in at the moment. And so if the interconnector's not there, the power stations pick up on it. What you have to accept if you've got the two interconnectors running is that some of that electricity will be generated by nuclear power, because the UK energy strategy not only involves intermittent wind power and things, but it involves nuclear power as well. And so the Isle of Man probably has to come up to facing that we're not self-sufficient in our energy, and actually as a small jurisdiction, does it make economic sense to try and support two power stations when actually we could tap into a much bigger supply and a much more secure supply?
Sorry, just get Andrew's view and I'll come back to you, Mark.
Yeah, I think we can't lose sight of what the objective is. And the objective is to avoid catastrophic climate change. We know how to measure that, we use carbon budgets, and that sets the timeline. And we need to apply that timeline in our thinking. And we already have the technologies to do that. We could start today in transforming our society with renewable energy. We could start today by restricting the buildings that are going up today and what they look like and how they are built and the materials they're built by and whether they have solar panels or not. And these are decisions that we can take today. And we know that renewable energy is falling in price. And we know that wind turbines, the technology and the knowledge. And so what we really need to do is empower our private industry, the people who are going to fit these technologies, to really start today and really start that industrial transformation of our society. We could put up the first wind turbine, the first serious wind turbine, is a small one near Guernsey, but we could put the first serious one up in the next 6 to 1 year. And that would really be a statement to the people in the Isle of Man about the future that we're developing. And we accept the energy from waste plant and what it looks like, a Viking ship, I think. And we accept every time we go through Paul Rose, the giant gas power station polluting our environment. Now, I think we could accept a wind turbine and we could appreciate it for what it is, setting the tone for the future of cheap, clean, renewable energy for our community.
Thank you. Mark, you want to add something?
Yeah, just a couple of quick points, if I may. if we were to, and I really do take the point you're making that we need to start now, absolutely. But with too much right now, too much intermittent renewables, we could end up with an energy surplus, which we'd have to pay someone to take. The other thing as well, I mean, in terms of paying things down, we were talking about returning on investment before and who's got to pay for what. Just to link into another strand, diversifying the economy, and I make no apologies for using that term. I know it's a soundbite that people are bandying around, but diversifying the economy, there's a green element to this. Green jobs that we can have, green companies. Something I mentioned 5 years ago was whether we could implement green technologies over here as a test bed, for example, kinetic roads, solar roads, that kind of thing.
We're going to come to the economy in a very short while.
But I was just going to make the point that those additional taxes would help pay for the infrastructure as well.
Okay, thanks. June Watson, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, just I think we're missing a trick if we're not just looking at the national level of generation. And as we've talked about wind farms, I've been a fan of wind farms for a long time. But we know that there's only so much of that can be provided by wind. And I think we're talking 20 to 30 megawatts in the balanced grid of wind power. And that's only really 6 wind turbines on the Isle of Man. We look at the fields that are out there, we could do so much better. We could be an overproducer of electricity, and that's got to be our future. Electrification has got to be our future. We forget, though, microgeneration at our peril in terms of reducing that reliance on the national grid and having that at the home level. But the real challenge and the real problem and the really tricky one that is not going to be simple and solved with the few soundbites that we'll get through tonight is retrofitting the 35,000 homes that we've got on this island, some of which were, our Manx stone cottages with thatched roofs. That's going to be the real challenge about how we're really going to deal with it. And that's a thorny problem that has yet to be really bottomed out.
Thank you. I want to move on to the economy. I've read quite a lot of, I've read every candidate's piece of campaign literature or manifesto over the last few weeks, and a very popular bullet point I see is we want to grow the economy. Okay, easy to say, harder to achieve. What is your idea or ideas to encourage business, to grow jobs, to grow the economy, but more importantly, to generate tax revenues that the government needs to pay for these essential public services? June Watterson.
I think it's been over-egged. I don't think that we really need to bust a gut to create a growing economy. The business community themselves provide that. We have got a reasonably well diversified economy and one that's continuing to grow. The latest statistics are that we're almost back down at pre-COVID levels of unemployment. So I don't think that the government needs to throw an awful lot of money at growing the economy when there are so many other spending priorities.
But we do have a lot of job vacancies that can't be filled in the market.
That's right. So we have a growing economy. We do have an awful lot of vacancies that can't be filled. That's about not having enough people here to do them. That's great. We don't have an awful lot of unemployed people looking for the work. So in terms of needing to spend in the way that we have done in the past, many years ago, lots of money trying to attract businesses to the Isle of Man, I think we've got better things we could spend that money on, and we've talked about one of them already.
Thank you. Mark Kemp.
Yeah, so I have to disagree with you there, June. I think growing the economy is important, but diversifying it further is more important. We've got to be mindful that we're moving from the third to the fourth industrial revolution. We're moving from digital tech into physical, so AI, robotics, that kind of thing. We have to keep pace. Look, when PokerStars came here, June, this is probably before your time, PokerStars came to the island, we sat back and we thought, great, e-gaming is up and running, and then it was 7 years before we really started pursuing it. We've got to do better. We've got to be looking at what these economies are that are coming down the line, and we have to be preparing for them. One of the ways we do that is through reforming education, creating earlier pathways further down in Key Stage 3, creating those pathways, and we could introduce, for example, STEM, science, technology, engineering, maths. We could introduce some vocational through BTECs at year 9. And we create those pathways and we start, this is a slow burn, but we start filling vacancies with skilled up and knowledgeable ex-students. Of course, there are other issues that we have to consider, But in terms of diversifying the economy, there's some simple kills as well, you know, an upcycling economy.
Do you feel a diversification of the economy? I hear this a lot, but DFE will tell you that they actually proactively market about 22, 23 business sectors. And you're saying we need to diversify further?
Of course we do. As I've just said, we're moving from one industrial revolution into another. We have to keep pace. We have to be constantly diversifying the economy. It doesn't just stop.
Thank you. Michelle Hayward?
I think I agree partly with you there that the key route to this is education, and that skills gap that we're experiencing at the moment. What we seem to have gone down the UK model of, you know, we're going to send our students through GCSEs and then we're going to send them through A-levels and we'll maybe throw in some BTECs in there. We're skipping entirely the new technical levels, which actually would train people for the software industry, and they are very, very targeted. And I know I've spoken to leaders in that industry who would welcome the ability to have somebody who comes in at the equivalent of an A-level candidate with the basic knowledge that they need to then be trained up within the company. And they would see that sometimes as better than having a graduate coming in on that. And it would solve that slight issue of, you know, if we send our graduates off, they discover life in the UK and perhaps don't come back, maybe not straight away, but maybe not for a few years as well. So you'd be able to start filling some of those gaps there. I think the other part of the economy that we often miss out on is what happens with small businesses. And we saw this during the COVID lockdown. We saw how that impacted on small business. And I genuinely got the feeling as a small business owner myself that the government had no understanding of the extent of small businesses and how they supported people's lives. And even if they were a small on the side business and it wasn't their main focus of their day job sort of thing, those extra small businesses that were running were so critical to people's lives. I think we need to create a much more supportive environment that smooths out the bureaucracy and doesn't insist on dozens of forms for small businesses. I'd like to see us looking at, for example, car tax for small businesses as well, because we penalise those who need a van because they're a plumber and they need to transport their tools around because they've got a van, and so we load them with car tax. And actually we should be looking at those small businesses, and in the UK there is a business rate for those. And so we could actually be doing a lot to help our own very, very entrepreneurial community to support themselves and to develop their own business ideas. And they have some fantastic businesses out there that we're not really doing enough with.
Thank you. Andrew?
Why do we have an economy? It's to make lives better. And if it's not doing that, it's not working for anyone. It's only working for a few, a very small minority. And we really need to focus on that. And we should get rid of this concept about growing GDP and that will make everyone's lives better. We need to really drill down into what actually is going on. And I think I would focus on the concept of resilience. And that would be resilient Ireland. How do we do more in the island so we're not just sending money off island? And we're creating micro-industries in the island around farming, around regenerative farming, organic farming, also around micro-production of foods, and then also, we've also spent a long time talking about energy, but we pay a vast, eye-watering sum of money to buy in gas, buy in oil. That's money that's just leaving the Isle of Man, where we could be using the assets we already have in the Isle of Man, being a more efficient society and saving more money. So that's a great opportunity for business and civil society alike. The next point is about resilience around debt. We live in a heavily indebted private island, like house prices. Someone buys a house today, 10 times their median income. We're putting money that could be used for investments in renewable energy, into bricks and mortar, unproductive assets. We live in houses, and that's why we have them. That's the important thing. They shouldn't be there as a speculative tool, the idea that they're just going to go up in value. And this is causing a real problem, not just in the Isle of Man, but around the world. Debt-led aggregate demand. Aggregate demand is no longer built upon the income we have from our jobs and buying products. It's built upon the debt we're indebted by and the interest we're paying out to a minority of lenders. And this is a big issue for our society.
Thank you. You notice in the question I mentioned also about tax revenues. We need to generate tax revenues. So we either put tax up or we attract, the way our tax system is structured, we have to attract more people here to pay income tax, to spend money so that we generate VAT receipts, of which I think 40% of government's income is from indirect taxation at the moment. What would you propose, if anything, we do about our tax? Most companies, as you know, don't pay any tax. Does that need to change? Michelle Hayward?
I suspect it might come to the point where we're forced to make that as a change, and we're forced to work down that route. I heard a startling discussion the other day, this was from Department for Enterprise, that Amazon is now the biggest retailer on the Isle of Man. And all of that is money that is spent out going across, and actually it's money that's not then spent in local businesses. And so we are at the point, we kind of created it a little bit through the lockdown, that we forced people into online shopping, but the online shopping is just hemorrhaging money away from us at the moment. We are going to seriously have to look at where the flow of money is moving.
Thank you. Jim Watterson, tax seems to be a very dirty word, but it pays for all these really great things that make our quality of life better. What should we do about it?
Well, I would say, like others, we will be probably forced down this road of a corporation tax, which will be a revenue raiser. But I don't want to be in the vanguard of that. I would really rather be a late adopter to that one. We do already generate £1.2 billion in taxes and charges, and actually that is enough for much of what we want to do. Whether it's spent wisely enough is something that I'm sure we'll come on to further down the line in the course of this debate. But really, it's creating the good jobs, the high earnings, increasing consumption that is actually going to generate those tax revenues, and something that has been remarkably resilient in the Isle of Man.
But is that amount of money enough to fund our future commitments, which we know are coming down the line?
Yeah, I think so, in terms of the way that we have the tax mix and how much revenue actually we take out of society in taxation actually compares pretty approximately with many other countries. We just do it in a far simpler way than other countries do. We can also get on to other really sort of complex issues, such as how much we take out in rates and how much we take out through nationalised industries, because ultimately it's going to be people like the electricity consumers as much as the taxpayer that's going to be funding some of the issues about energy that we've talked about already.
Thank you. Andrew Langan-Newton.
Yeah, well, the Biden agreement, if we call it that, is what was a global rate of 15%. We haven't seen any details from the OECD on exactly what that will look like, and whether it will just be for global international companies or whether it would be also for local companies that just relate to the Isle of Man. And as Michelle's already said, we'd expect this to come to be a reality in the coming years, and that will have huge impacts for areas of our economy, and we need to be cognizant of that. And diagnosis is so much better than denial, and being appreciative of this change and how our society is constructed, and then having an open public dialogue and debate about the future and what we want the Isle of Man to be like, and how we use our tax system, not just to generate revenue, but to generate justice within our community as well. And whether it does that now with flat rates, with a tax cap, for example, is that something that's working for the man in the street and the people in our society? And is it fair? And is it fit for purpose? And I think there should be. There used to be a tax commission in the Isle of Man, which had people, representatives of industry, and with politicians on it as well, who delved into the issues around taxation and what taxation was doing, and what the future was going to be like with certain taxes. There was a land speculation tax at one point. We might be talking about that in the future, for example, and that was the product of the Tax Commission. And so maybe we need, again, an institution, an organisation like that to have a public debate around taxation. And I would be very keen on that, because taxes are something that affects everyone in the community. And it should be an equitable tool to build the society we want, but also replicate the principle of justice within that community.
Thank you. Mark Kemp?
Yeah, so the sword of Damocles is the G7 and the watchful gaze on our tax jurisdiction. Yep, maybe in time we will be forced to change things, but for right now, I think we're fine. We've got budget reform, which we should be undertaking. Juan, I know you agree with me on this one. Zero-based budgeting would be the way forward. There's a lot of savings to be had. I can reference you back to several instances. For example, the Department for Enterprise, when they did the TT World Series, it's about $500,000 just wasted there. We had the Slock Road in, was it 2015-16, 460-odd thousand just wasted there. We know that those bits of flex are within departmental budgets. Add those up, that money can be put back into other reform areas. Just very quickly, taxation, we've got to be mindful how we do it. I mean, the sugar tax was introduced. How does that help poor families, people in food and fuel poverty? And we've got to be careful, because whilst we've talked about growth and diversifying the economy, we haven't really got into, I mean, Andrew's talked about it a little bit there, but you know, it's the health of the economy as well. And Michelle was talking before about the entrepreneurial sector, which I'm a big believer in. I used to teach about this when I was a teacher. And then, of course, you know, we've got other green initiatives we can talk about, such as the vertical farming. So we're bringing new industries in which create tax revenue. But we've got to be careful what kind of taxes we're putting in. Sugar tax doesn't really help with anything.
Thank you. Jim Watson, would zero-based budgeting be best working hand in hand with government as a single legal entity?
Well, I think we can talk far more productively, I think, about matrix management than single legal entities, which I think is a bit of a smokescreen for a lot of the underlying issues that government has. In terms of budget reform, I mean, we have a broken budget system that allows £70 million worth of capital schemes to go through on a take it or leave it basis. Same with all the fees and charges, same with all of the department spend. We send delegates to Tynwald to vote on important issues, and yet the budget is the one real issue that we are denied a real voice on. We're not allowed to amend it, we're not allowed to engage the public in it until it's presented, and then we want to vote on it on the same day. It's a system that is not fit for purpose in a modern democracy. I've tried many times to change it since 2006, and I hope to build a coalition of the willing of those who are going to help reform that system.
Thank you. Anybody else want to comment on that?
Yeah, well, actually, some experience down at local authority level of broken budgeting systems, and you know, you get the absurd thing of sitting there the last meeting before you need to set a rate with them and going, okay, so we just add 2% on all of that, and let's not really look at what happened to last year's budget. And I see that same thing happening with government departments, and I see representatives of departments coming down at the start of March and saying, can we buy this, can we buy this, can we buy this? Can you invoice us by the end of March? Otherwise we're going to lose this money because it won't roll over to next year. And so they've carefully budgeted their way through a year, and then suddenly it's all that big spend at the end. And it's just an absurd way. You wouldn't run your own household finances like that. Local authorities don't get to run their budgets like that, and yet the government is getting away with it, and it's just not acceptable.
Thank you. Andrew, anything to add?
No, I take a different view on the sugar tax than Mark, but it's not an issue we need to debate now.
Yeah,
Jim Watson?
I'm more likely to agree with Andrew, I think, because I think we need to discourage cheap fast foods away from people. And that's why I put the motion down about putting the sugar tax in here in the first place. In terms of zero-based budgeting, it can be done. It has been done. I did it in the Department of Home Affairs during not the last administration, but the administration before. And that, just working on a target operating model, cutting the centre, sticking to the essentials, we were able to save 25% of the budget of that department, reduce the headcount by 14%. This is an exercise that needs replicating across government.
Andrew?
Yeah, this debate has helped me to stimulate a thought in my mind, which is a key point, which I think, and the Isle of Man. Apologies. The Isle of Man government paid, or the Parliament paid, a member of the House of Lords a large sum of money to come across and produce a report about our democracy, about our political institutions, which has largely gone without any actions. And the key point, one of the many key points of Lord Lisvane, was the balance between the government and the Parliament, and who is the dog and who is the tail and which is wagging the other. And I think the budget is an example or an illustration of this imbalance where the government is taking the lead, and really the government should be executing the decisions of the Parliament, not the other way around. It shouldn't be the government coming and going, pass this and you get no say in it. It should be the Parliament who take control, and that involves the Parliament having independence from government. There should absolutely be a government. There should be ministers who go and take the decisions of the Parliament, the important decisions governing our society, and execute them, the executive. But they shouldn't have control of the Parliament. They should just be representing the views of the Parliament, the intentions of the Parliament, the vision of the Parliament for the future of the Isle of Man. And any decision that we take in our society in a broken parliamentary system then is not going to be the optimum decision we can take as a society. And I think the report on how MHKs will be paid in this future Parliament, and the decision to take that and passed that is positive in bringing more balance and giving the opportunity for more MHKs to step out of government and say, well, we're going to be holding government to account, we're going to be scrutinising the decisions of government and making sure they have the best intentions in what they are executing for the future of our community. And the budget, again, repeating my point, is that the budget is an illustration of the failure in our parliament.
Okay, thanks. Mark, final word on that?
Yeah, I was just going to say, so Andrew's picked up on something I said on Manx Radio, possibly come across it independently as well, but safeguarding the future bill, that's something I put out there, that I want all successful candidates, if I'm successful, to work with me, and we're bringing politics back to the people. Something else I just want to quickly touch on. With the budget, we can't get too hung up on zero-based, of course. We have to be mindful of priority-based budgeting. So if we're talking about cutting numbers in Home Affairs, for example, we've got to be mindful that if you slash police numbers, operation number 237, if you go below 200, you're going to create problems down the line.
Thank you. Final word from you, Duran, on this?
Yeah, and just in terms of going back to Lisbon, half those recommendations were implemented. But going back, things such as independence of pay, but this current system that we have of scrutiny, again, which I think has moved on light years since when I started, which was literally we had the Public Accounts Committee and the Scrutiny Committee. We now have a far more involved system that looks and gives departments an annual health check. It focuses in on the policies that they're doing, and then the Public Accounts Committee draws those threads together, and that's really worked. And again, that was another initiative that I brought in my first term that's now really showing results some 10 years later.
Thank you. At this point, are there any questions from the audience? Nope. Okay, thanks. Access to affordable housing is a really big theme in this election, and it's well known that local first-time buyers are finding it increasingly difficult to get a foothold on the property ladder. And at the same time, the government actively promotes the fact that the island lacks any restrictions on buying property, for off-island investors. What actions would you propose to help first-time buyers? Mark Kemp?
Yep, thank you. So it's a two-pronged approach, and we do have to be mindful that government can't tinker too much in the free market here. However, can impose legislation on, for example, institutional buyers from across. So if you're going to buy a tranche of houses, you've got to set up a company, and you're going to be taxed on the island. Coming at it from the other side, though, how do we deal with the demand that we've got right now? I've been looking at a few different solutions. One of them, I've come across a company in Scotland that creates prefab, sustainable, ecologically responsible houses. And these can be between 40 to 60,000, maybe 70,000. So if government was able to buy an option on some of this zoned land, build some of these houses, which can go up within a couple of weeks, and they are good quality, we can start digging into that demand right now, and we can start levelling off the increases in the cost of housing. We can actually get people onto the property ladder, which is really important.
Thank you. Duran Watterson?
Yeah, I mean, we have seen over recent years affordability, the ratio of the first quartile house price to the first quartile of wages, that being where most first-time buyers sit, really rise again in terms of the multiple between the two. Government does do a fair bit to help in terms of 25% of new developments being first-time buyers at an approved government rate, 30% equity stake in the market, but this still isn't enough, even though we're facing what I think at the moment is a bit of a housing bubble based on disrupted supply chains out of COVID. We are going to have to continue to build houses, but we also, I think, need to take a strategic look at the housing mix on the Isle of Man, and we have far more single-person households than we've had in the past. And if you look at our not just our local authority housing, but general private housing, it's still heavily geared around family homes. And that's not necessarily where we need that to be going forward. So that's where I think we need this sort of a strategic umbrella to look at these issues and plan them out into the future, because we are going to have to carry on building homes. We do need all of our homes to be better insulated and built up to better standards, and that isn't going to be cheap. So that's one element of it. The other element in terms of government's direct action is that one of the positive developments coming out of the last administration has been the Manx Economic Development Corporation. And that's basically having developers working for government to develop sites that are in government ownership already. Brownfield sites, which is where you want the development to be, places like Murray's Road School, Summerland, Lord Street, these sites that are crying out for redevelopment, prime opportunities for single-person units, a lot of different price points to try and rebalance the housing mix on our island. So this is about then being able to get onto the ladder in the first place, moving up through the housing ladder, and then being able to move down the other side again as you downsize when you're older. So it's about taking a strategic look at all of these issues and putting them into that context. That's what we need to do in the next administration.
Thank you. Andrew Langan-Newton.
So, yeah, I agree with you. We're in a bubble and we're building into a bubble. This is a big issue. The strategic plan 2016 proposed in the region, I think it was 5,200 more properties. At a time when the census stated we already had 43,000 properties in the Isle of Man. Building another 5,000 properties into an inflated market means that we're getting to the cliff edge a lot closer. And that's a concern because our population is declining as well, in the region of about 100 people per year. And we don't see, well, we've seen some people coming in after COVID, but prior to that, we've had a decline in population. And then again, that's building into a bubble, the prospect of demand really potentially dropping off. But what we're experiencing here in the Isle of Man and across the world is a credit-led bubble, which is the access to very cheap credit has really ballooned the property market. And we've gone from a period of time when you might have bought your property for 3 times your income, but paid an interest rate for it, to a time when you are buying a property at 10 times your median income. And this is really indebting our future. So my proposal is a shared responsibility mortgage. And this is something the government can promote with lenders, with the appropriate tax measures, and with individuals within our community, and maybe they can also do it as well for first-time buyers. And that, rather than borrowing money on debt, because the problem when you borrow money on debt is the lender has the principal right to the property. They're safe. If you lose your job, or COVID hits and you can't work, you still have to pay, but the lender knows it's got the principal right to your property, so it's safe. Now, with the shared equity mortgage, what actually happens is it's more like, rather than a debt, if the price of the property goes down, the proportion that you put goes down, and the proportion that the lender goes down as well. So you don't get underwater, because if you borrow a property and pay a 20% deposit, then if the property goes down, then you could be underwater very quickly when the lender has the rest. So that's really looking at the credit side, how we fund the purchase of our properties, and look for more equitable relationships in that transaction, not a black and white transaction. If the price of the properties all across the Isle of Man go down, but your debt is still fixed at £350,000, well, you're in really trouble unless you get a debt write-down, and we don't see many of those.
Thank you. Michelle?
I think there's a couple of extra things that feed into that, and generally I agree with the panel, but we are neglecting to address our empty homes issue. We don't charge rates on empty homes, and you've got numerous places where the house has been built and they've not put a toilet in, because that means that it's not habitable and therefore the rate's not being charged. And that doesn't happen in other jurisdictions. All properties are subject to rates, and I think if you're a homeowner with one of these empty properties and somebody started charging you rates, it would focus your mind on getting that property back into use. We have lots of properties that we aren't actually using. I think the other unspoken thing is that within the local authority housing market, there are 2 tenancy types in existence. There are those that have done in the last 5-10 years that are means tested, annually means tested, health checked, etc., etc. And there are those that are the lifetime tenancies. And I'm sure that we can all recall local authority houses that we visited where parked on the driveway are cars that are far more expensive than any vehicle I've ever owned in my life, and there are people having 4 holidays a year and things like that. And on the lifetime tenancies in those local authority houses, they are paying tiny amounts of rent, yet there may be 1, 2, 3, 4 adult earners in that property. And we've failed. Local authorities don't have the power to address that. But what you're doing there is you're creating a block so that your first-time buyers and your new starters and those people are forced into private accommodation where they're paying far more. They can't save towards their owning their own home. And you're actually creating that block where people can't move into their own housing. And I think we've kind of let that slide. We don't seem to want to address the problem, but it is a real issue.
Thank you. Sorry, Mark, and
I'll
come back to you.
One very, very quick point, which is we've focused on the issue of supply and demand and people not being able to get on the ladder. Michelle's made some points there as well, on a slightly different tangent, but something we haven't considered is homeless. What are we doing about them? We must house people. Governments have failed us in the past. So we need solutions for that. Now, a homeless village would be a good start, where these people can be put back on their feet. For example, they can grow their own crops and sell them. So they're starting, they can be retrained, upskilled. We can give people their pride back, but more importantly, we can put a roof over their head.
Thank you. Julian Watterson?
Yeah, just to come back to the tenancy issue, and the new tenants are means tested every 5 years and have to basically reapply for their tenancy, and that is a really positive development because those who don't need those houses need to move on, and I'd agree legislation is required to bring those people who are on the old tenancy into the new tenancy, because we do 16% of our housing stock on the Isle of Man is local authority housing. 16% of the people, coincidentally, on this island are working for less than the living wage. I think we have enough local authority houses. It's about making sure that we get the movement in it to make sure that they're going to the people who need it. That's the critical element.
Thank you. OK, I just want to move it on to something new. In the recently published Chief Constable's report, drug seizures and drug-related violence contributed to an 18% rise in crime in the Isle of Man. What measures would you propose to tackle this? Michelle Hayward.
Sorry, scribbling. It's a growing problem, and we've seen this, and it's partly driven by the lack of travel, and I suspect the level of drugs arriving probably isn't very different, but the detection rate is higher now because we've reduced travel, and so you've forced measures in there. I'm hopeful that the new border force, although that's not related to the Chief Constable, it's within Cabinet Office, I'm hopeful that the new border force would go into a more intelligence-led targeting. And I know I have spoken to the Chief Constable, and he was talking very positively about links that they've made with Lancashire Police and with Liverpool Police, and looking at those routes and looking at it as a county lines operation. It's a worrying development. Drug use goes up when societies are unhappy, and I think this is a big reflection on the impact that COVID has had on everyone's mental health. And it doesn't matter what context you look in, whether it's a work context or school, everyone is fractious and everyone is feeling anxious. And I think that lack of security that we've experienced over the last couple of years is actually driving people to look for that escape. And so I hope this is a bit of a blip, that as we start to recover from COVID and things start to become more settled and the world's become a little bit more predictable for everyone, that we start to see that sort of use settling down a little bit.
OK, thanks. Andrew?
Yeah, I think 2 points. I absolutely agree with Michelle about the concept of trauma and addiction. And as a society which, societies that are consumed by issues around addiction, they lead from trauma in that society, whether that comes from instability in the employment sector or stress in the immediate environment or your social environment, or people who can be surrounded by people who are already addicts. So we need to look at that, and this concept around the war on drugs is a broken system and it should be disregarded, and we should be focusing on well-being with our community and looking at trauma and understanding the background around addiction. But also around, I think, cannabis. Globally, we're coming to terms with the idea that this is a product that is better treated in a controlled fashion, not in a criminalised fashion. And we're seeing legalisation all around the world. And I think that's a debate, a public debate we need to have in the Isle of Man. And it should start by immediately decriminalising cannabis and then go in to have a public consultation on the legalisation of marijuana and whether our society is accepting that and going, we are paying to criminalise these people, putting them into a system where they are then punished and persecuted for choices they made. And often young people as well, impressionable young people. But looking at the system rather as through well-being and understanding trauma, not a criminalisation.
Thank you. Mark Kemp?
Yeah, I'll just go back to a point I made earlier. Operational police number 237. I think at one point it dipped to around the low 190s. Now we're starting to see issues down the road, and also post-COVID, more issues. The supply of drugs into the island has barely stopped, and there's a real issue with vulnerable children being targeted by drug dealers. This is something I've come across in my time as a teacher, and I've come across it in my research as well. Heads of schools are extremely disturbed by what they're seeing and what's happening. And I remember being at a Year 11 prom, and somebody I saw coming down the road was someone I'd actually removed from a nightclub before in my security days, which was a part-time job, by the way, not my full-time job. And I remember we had to call the police, but it was already too late. They'd already dished out the drugs. So this has been going on for a long time, but the problem gets exacerbated because the police are trying to play catch-up now, because they've had to recruit a vast number, but they don't have the experience anymore to deal with these things. So county lines problems, real issue. Other issues, the police need to get better control of things like CCTV footage. Sometimes that just goes missing. Decriminalisation of cannabis. Yeah, I'm with Andrew on this one. Definitely need a public debate on it. Rehabilitation, focus on that as well. There has to be a focus on rehabilitation. Being punitive all the time, what are we doing? We're just teaching people that, right, you're going to go to jail, then you're going to get out, and then you're going to go back to jail. But what we could be doing is educating, and educating as well at an earlier age. There's not a lot goes on in the PSHE lessons in schools in this sense. There's token gestures. This isn't the fault of schools or teachers. It's just there's not the time or the resources to be educating on this scale.
Thank you. And Julian Watterson?
In terms of the drugs issue, the police and the Chief Constable's report is really the tip of the spear on this one. And that's the most visible set of consequences that we see out of the downsides of this. I think I tend to concur with what else has been said on the panel, really, about sort of better detections come out of better intelligence with Lancashire and Merseyside. There have been more resources put into this area over the years, but it's also about reducing demand in terms of looking at education and minimising the adverse childhood experiences that often lead to that demand in drugs. The social isolation and social escapism that is needed in order to actually deal with, that again is fueling that demand. And as has been said, it is vulnerable young people that are being used to ship the drugs over here, who are then also ending up with the liabilities for the drug debt. They're then ending up in a cycle of violence that is really sort of having an impact on our society. Like others, I would actually propose a select committee on cannabis in its widest sense, medicinal and recreational, because we need to look at this in the round. We don't just need to look at it as a recreational drug issue. We need to look at what the Isle of Man is doing as a whole in this space and joining those dots together, looking across not just the economic impact, but health, mental and physical, the criminal justice, that the production side of it that the Isle of Man is already engaging in. When I was Home Affairs Minister, there was a lead workshop on drugs, and I, as Home Affairs Minister, stepped back from that and made sure that the Health Minister replaced it, because that sent the right message about what we should be doing about drugs as a societal problem. This is fundamentally a health problem, not a criminal justice problem.
Okay, thank you. Just moving on, the current road safety strategy states that the nature of our roads is part of the culture of the Isle of Man. And according to 2019 Isle of Man government figures, people are twice as likely to be killed or seriously injured on Manx roads as they are on England's roads. How do you propose fixing that? Is it restrictions on speed, or are there other things that you would propose we can do to rectify that? Mark Kemp.
Yeah, so this is about observation as well. When you're out driving and you've been in cars of people and you've heard the expletives because people are frustrated by people coming across them, pulling out of junctions, and then of course you see when you're driving people go flying across roundabouts. In Rushen, we have a school directly on a roundabout, and every single day I see people going flying through that roundabout. So we need traffic calming measures on the lead up to those, and I think we need that across the island. I noticed it was around about 2015, this suddenly became quite a feature, and it's getting worse. We've got roads still in the south that I think 20's plenty for them. For example, Beach Road, which is adjacent to where I live. There's a number of cars that go absolutely tearing down that road. But there's other things we need to do as well. We need to be removing vehicles from the road. So, for example, on Gansey, we have surfers that come down, and you find that you can get a bottleneck with all the cars that are there. Now, it's not them, they're enjoying themselves, but we do need to do something to remove those cars from that area.
Thank you. Michelle Hayward?
I think it's one of those, it's like the dual nature, isn't it, of road safety, that we complain about potholes, we complain about poor road surfaces, we complain about junctions that aren't quite aligned right, but all of those things serve to slow us down. And then the road gets fixed and suddenly the speed goes up. Now we complain about the speed going through the roads. In Portsmouth, where I happen to know the figures, the average speed through the village is 24 miles an hour. The 20 mile an hour scheme will kick in at Fistard. It will run right the way through. And there are two hotspots in the village where speeds tend to be a bit faster. And it's Station Road approaching the school, which isn't protected, but will be soon. And it's Queen's Road. And Queen's Road down the village, there's pretty much, it's a long sweeping bend. And you can turn that corner and you can be doing in excess of the speed limit and still manage to stay safely on the road. And so drivers tend to drive to the speed of the road that's there. So I disagree with the Gansey point, and actually because the cars are there, everyone slows down, and it slows them down as it brings them up onto Beach Road. It speeds up again as it comes past Renwill and Close and where you live, because the road is wide and clear and people have that perception that it's not dangerous. So measures like you've seen in St Mark's, where they put in planters in the road, and I'm genuinely not a fan of those. I'm not a fan of speed humps either. But the idea that roads narrow and that it feels perceptually narrower, it does slow people down. And whatever measures we put in that are going to protect our towns and villages and our built-up areas have to be self-policing. They have to work without the need for technology or somebody knocking on your door or fines being imposed. And so they have to create that environment where drivers naturally see that as an environment that they need to slow down in. One of the new things that will be happening outside Portsmouth School is there will be a traffic island going in just as you turn from the crossroads. So as you turn in front of the school, there'll be a traffic island, which will be great. And highways have been really, really good at working with local authorities. It's taken a few meetings, hasn't it, Duan? Yeah, a little bit. Yeah, they're better now. They've been very good at working with local authorities and trying to find ways that suit the local environment. So one of the hotspots that I've picked up on was in Colby Level, and the traffic's coming way too fast through there. When I asked Highways about it, turns out they've surveyed the wrong road and they've not actually got traffic speed data for there at all. But it is possible they're going to go and survey that. It's all going to pop up fairly soon. Down near Oristol is where it's a big issue. So I think there are ways that we can control speed. I think you're right, though, about the general culture of the Isle of Man, that it is about speed and it is about driving fast. One of the things I noticed, I used to live in London, one of the things I noticed here is how bike-aware people are. And it's generally because either people know somebody who rides a motorbike or they've ridden one themselves, and that level of understanding of bikes tends to be really high here. So actually, the level of bike accidents, ignoring TT, but the level of bike accidents tends to be much lower than in the UK because the awareness is so much there. And so I think we have a very different culture. I know the accident rate on Manx roads is higher, and there is that absence of a speed limit. And there are points where I think perhaps some of those faster roads would warrant it.
Okay. Okay, thank you. June Watterson.
Possibly the worst person to answer this question is the professional pedestrian and someone who's never actually taken a driving lesson. But this is a cultural issue, and it's the psychological interventions. So, for example, at Queen's Road, say people do try and drive to the speed of the road, and by sharpening the turning left, you will then slow the traffic down, so they have to slow down further to make the turn, so that you're working off then a lower speed before they sort of can accelerate down the straight part of Queen's Road. Likewise, cars parked on Beach Road have slowed down the traffic there, and along Gansey, I think the issue is not so much the parked cars, which do a great job slowing the traffic down. What's needed there are double yellow lines and sections, so it's acting as fire brakes, if you like, to allow the traffic to weave in and out, to avoid the buses coming the other way, rather than having a 150-metre block of traffic, to be able to sort of move in and out. So the cultural issue, though, to come back to, is about having time to travel. And because I don't drive, I do plan my day a lot more effectively. I get the bus to work, and I'd like to think I'm an average user of public transport, and it's a great productivity tool. You get an extra advert here for Isle of Man Transport. There's a bus every 15 minutes from Port Erin to Douglas. Please use it. And it is about allowing you an extra half an hour, either thinking time, reading time, working time, even on the bus on the way to Douglas. And I think that is a cultural issue that we've never quite made the leap into here in the Isle of Man, because everyone is still very wedded to their car. The last issue that we possibly haven't talked about much is about enforcement, and that's key. We've seen the cardboard boy kicking around Port Erin and Portsmouth area in recent weeks. I'm not sure that that's really doing the job. The smiley faces do make people stop, make people think. The ones that actually give you your speed, I think, only encourage bad behaviours, and certainly have done in some parts of the island. And I also see that I think Malou have done well in terms of taking a lead on local authorities taking a line on enforcing speed and traffic measures in their area, and by giving sort of traffic warden style powers to local authorities, and also to hand out GATSO guns to them to allow them to test for speeding in hotspots. I think that will give a real sort of local community level of enforcement in areas where I think people feel like it's forgotten outside of Douglas.
Thank you. Andrew?
I think we have, all of us here have inherited an environment, a community built around the car, and that's built into how we've built our communities historically, how we've travelled, mobility around the Isle of Man. So we're starting from a difficult place, but it's then what decisions can we take in the future that then can gradually start to shape our dependence on active travel, as June has already said, on bus travel, and how then we design our future conurbations so that it can enhance safety for people to be outside in areas like play streets, so they can go out and people can feel comfortable letting their children play on the street in the knowledge that they're not going to get run down by someone coming too quickly or not being aware enough. So design of our communities. The next point is about public transport. How can we invest in public transport to take more cars off the road? By incentivising the ability, and with regular public transport that has good access to the internet, like we have on the buses and maybe on the train as well, or on the trams, and is free. And is incentivised to use it. And even if we took 10% of the people who would have chosen to drive their car and use public transport instead, that's better for car drivers, because there's fewer cars on the road, less congestion, and there's easier for them to try and park. Everyone's gone to Douglas and tried to find a parking space and then spent ages trying to drive around to find a parking space and wasted time where we could have been using it in our shops, in our capital, or some other valuable activity. So yes, design of community, incentivising the use of public transport to reduce car dependence, and lastly, as Ewan also commented upon, how can we discourage bad behaviours? And I recall Minister Baker didn't seem to be in favour of speed cameras, and there seems to have been historically a desire not to have a universal, a top speed limit across the Isle of Man, whether it's like 70 miles an hour or 100 miles per hour in restricted places currently. And I recall the High Bailiff, now Second Deemster, I think in an inquest in 2015, making a comment towards where some unfortunate individual died speeding, a very sad loss, and he made a comment as a coroner of inquest stating that why do we not have the speed limit, because examples like that, that unfortunate case may have been avoided. So yeah, we should, again, public debate around what measures we would accept as a society, like speed cameras, like a national speed limit, because it's in everyone's interests. We could lose relatives, we could be subject to a crash ourselves, and no one wants that end. So it's what measures do we appropriately put in place to bring safety to our community?
Thank you very much, and thank you everyone. That wraps up our questions for this evening. All that remains now is for each candidate to have their final word on why they should receive your vote. And we start with Duane Watterson.
Thank you. As someone who is embedded in the Rushen community with a track record of speaking for you, pursuing value for money, working with others, and with a real passion for social justice, if you place your trust in me for another 5 years, I will work with the same honesty, diligence, passion, integrity and commitment that has characterised my last 15 years. It's been a pleasure to serve you, and I hope to serve you again.
Thank you, Duane. Andrew Langan-Newton.
In 2021, we're facing possibly the most important election we've ever faced. We're a world which is on the cusp of climate change, which we want to avoid. And the choices we make today could be the choices towards the future that we all want to share in. A future transformed by the opportunities of clean, abundant, renewable energy, of strengthening well-being in our society, of investing in education, of protecting our environment and enhancing the circular economy in the Isle of Man. Vote for me, for this vision, for the future, on September the 23rd.
Thank you, Andrew. Mark Kemp.
Thank you. Ask yourselves this. Do you want more of the same, what you've had before, or do you want someone different who's going to fight for you? Do you want someone who will be invested in you, or do you want somebody who's going to bow and sway to the whims of government? Now consider this. You're all stakeholders. So when you're driving home, this is to the audience, this is to anyone who listens to this and then drives home, consider, feel the roads underneath you, smell the fields, breathe in the sea air, look at the schools around you, remember the times you were there, think about your sons and daughters, grandchildren who are there, and remember, you are stakeholders in all of this. You want your money spent wisely, you want this island protected. Safeguard your future. Vote Kemp on September the 23rd.
Thank you, Mark. Michelle Hayward.
The Isle of Man is an excellent and wonderful place to live in. We all know we've chosen to live here. I have a wide range of experience of working with various government departments, both professionally and through local government in a variety of roles. I think that experience gives me a head start in actually working collaboratively within government, looking to solve problems with time to listen, and I want to help carry on developing a compassionate and caring and fair society where everyone feels included, where mental health isn't neglected, and where we can all have a pride in how our island is run.
Thank you, Michelle, and thank you to all the candidates for attending this evening and giving us your views. They are Michelle Hayward, Mark Kemp, Andrew Langan-Newton, and Duane Watterson. Now, it's over to you. Where will your votes be going on September the 23rd? Thank you for watching. Goodbye. I'm Richard Slee. Join us before the polls close at 8 p.m. on Thursday the 23rd of September for Election Night Live from Studio One and Energy FM. Look forward to seeing you.